Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Cole. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective debate. I select topics to discuss and debate with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future. I track those predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss and debate with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guest for this episode is Dawson Wagner. Dawson currently works as the assistant chief operator for Wildcat 91.9 FM, and that's the local radio station for Kansas State University. And Dawson also is a drone pilot for Wagner Media, and that's Wagnair. Get it? Air, Wagner. Dawson graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in Mass Communications and Digital Media with a minor in Leadership in Unmanned Aircraft Systems from Kansas State University. Dawson is a licensed Part 107 remote pilot and is a graduate teaching assistant pursuing his Master of Science degree in Mass Communications at Kansas State University, studying Generation Z or Gen Z and their usage of social media. On this episode, Dawson Wagner and I discuss social media applications and the future of the World Wide Web, or as some would say, the internet. So, Dawson, thanks for joining me today and being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. Let me start by asking you this. What do you think of the current state of social media and how it is used today?
Well, Ben, thanks for having me. That was a phenomenal intro to all the different things that I'm very passionate about and interested in. And for me, when I look at the current state of social media, it just feels very chaotic. There is a lot of misinformation and disinformation that spreads very easily nowadays. And so I'm very curious in understanding how people can get legitimate information that isn't syndicated from an influencer with a certain perspective that is trying to influence the type of, I guess, dialogue and narrative that's going on. Because so often I feel like the legacy media or traditional journalists are criticized for skewing the narrative or having an agenda, and when in reality that's just been inflated on social media and through these influencers, I mean, tenfold. And it's fascinating to see this kind of dynamic play out and where Gen Z is specifically trusting this information and getting this information from. And so I'm going to be conducting a study in the coming months with a survey that I'll be distributing to hopefully hundreds, if not thousands, of Gen Z ages 18 to 24 to better understand where are people getting their information, number one, mainly on social media. Which social media platforms are they using prominently for either videos or just written text, and which one do they use the most for the types of information that they want to consume? And then does the actual person who's running the platform influence that? Is the person like a Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk or Truth Social with Donald Trump and his social media, does that influence the adoption of that platform? I'm very fascinated by that. And so the current state of social media, in my opinion, is one that is very convoluted and people don't know how to actually approach it besides just, oh, I'm going to go scroll and just see the latest memes and funny videos, when in reality there's a much deeper phenomenon that I think needs to be studied here to kind of figure out this shift that's almost happening and where people are getting their information and what they're trusting.
Yeah, so I had Dr. Steve Smathers on to talk about media literacy. So, and I think you probably had him as a professor at one point.
Yes, yes,
So,
I did.
yeah, so maybe you can give a little bit more about what you think about the current state of media literacy, especially when it comes to technology and media usage and social media
Yeah.
usage.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm nervous about is with the utilization of AI to make things a lot easier in the day-to-day lives. Yes, it's a great tool to be able to utilize, and I definitely am a proponent of using it as a tool to help enhance and better understand a complex subject and break down and find sources, which for me, I've utilized Perplexity AI to be able to actually search and go through and find scholarly articles that are then able to help me go in and read through and then break down what those articles are talking about. But I wouldn't have been able to find those articles if I didn't query and search through with this AI that has a large language model that's trained on all those different articles. So, in some ways, for me, the media literacy side and using AI can be beneficial in finding sources and seeking out things that then I can read further and then be able to use as a tool to help enhance what I am researching and understanding. The issue that so often I see students who I teach in audio production essentials and podcasting and video production essentials is they will just script something out or ask it to generate something and then they will just take that and copy and paste. And that's where that it's an issue in terms of the actual creativity and putting your own type of I wouldn't say spin, but personality really to it. I think that's the issue that sometimes it gets lost when creating something more, I guess, that you're passionate about or that you're wanting to explore that doesn't involve just facts and news and instead is a little bit more artsy. That's where I have problems where I think people should put more of their impression and in the art that they create, and they shouldn't just have it generated for them. Whereas when it comes to the media literacy side and the facts, I do appreciate that there is a really good large language model that's being built, whether it be ChatGPT or Perplexity, that can find sources and help fact check with the articles that they then go and find to help understand the phenomenon or whatever misinformation is being spread. And so that's the positive side that I see with media literacy, being able to fact check and find sources. Now, do I think all students are doing that? No, I think that some of them are just taking the first source and the first post that they see on social media and then wondering, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is true. And then just continuing to share that as, hey, well, I heard and I think I saw. And that's then where the rumors get spread and misinformation can make its way around a lot quicker. And so for me, it's asking those questions to the students and querying, where did you get that? Number one. And number two, who was it? And then where did they get their information from? And how can we get to the base source, that original article or city commission meeting? As an example, the most recent one where I think we're past it, and in the last 2.5 weeks has been kind of hectic with breaking down with my students and understanding the dogs and cats in Ohio are not being eaten in Springfield by Haitian immigrants because of a narrative that was spread from a city commission meeting that had one individual claiming that he saw someone eating cats, and then a police report where someone claimed they saw someone stealing a cat, and then that being inflated through the use of AI memes around the political candidate and specifically having Donald Trump surrounded by cats and him saving cats. And then there's this narrative that then continues to be spun of they are going to be continuing to eat cats and dogs. And if we don't elect Donald Trump, then this will keep having issues. And that's completely aside from the actual like real issues of mass immigration to the United States and strained resources, which is a valid thing to be able to discuss, and how we actually create policy around helping people who are moving here. but it totally just takes away and strips that whole entire discussion and being able to understand the media literacy behind that actual issue of how did this get from a city commission meeting to then social media to then my students actually thinking that people are eating dogs and cats, or at least immigrants are eating dogs and cats in this one community that they've never been to and have never heard of. And so that's just one example of I think we're past that point now 2 weeks later and continually sending sources to each other. And I've been updating my students on this is where it's at now. This is what's been proven. This is the city manager that's doing investigation that has found nothing. And actually showing those sources of where the information is coming from and who is sharing that information. And to me, that's how you are able to hopefully keep media literacy at the front line and continuing to keep students thinking about how you check your sources and find that base starting point of where that story began. And that's where I hope, my at least education and the want to share with students how you find that and engage in that understanding of media literacy will hopefully help in their development in using social media moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, sounds to me like you want your students to continue to ask those questions, the who, what, why, when, where, how, and those type of questions
Right.
with every situation, with every news article they see. If they're not asking those questions in their mind and trying to answer those with that baseline, they can get lost really fast. And you mentioned the cats and dogs, that was 2 weeks ago. What's next? There's always gonna be something else. So you always have to be making sure that you're looking for the credibility of the source, making sure it's real, and making sure that you're looking at other sources as well to triangulate that information, right? So
Hmm.
I'm glad that you're teaching those students that and trying to answer those questions, the who, what, why, when, where, and how questions. It's really, really important. So, how do you think social media can be improved, Dawson?
Yeah, so I really like, for as much as I disagree with some of the things that Elon Musk has done with X or Twitter, whichever you want to call it. I'll just refer to as X for now because that's what I guess all the mainstream has been forced to adopt in some ways. So on X, he's the community notes that he has implemented, that was already starting to be implemented on the previous administration for Twitter and those who owned it. They had kind of a trial run and were looking at implementing community notes. But then once Elon Musk took over, he emphasized it even more, which I appreciated because he has been community noted multiple times on his own platform now and has had numerous politicians and people spreading misinformation be community noted with sources. And I think it's a pretty incredible invention and to me is the future of how we are able to dispel misinformation online and social media. And so I think that that's one thing that's going to have to be a part of this new wave of adoption when it comes to future social media applications. Because on X, Elon Musk is trying to create an everything app, and the people that work on there are trying to create an everything app. What that means and what that actually is still out for whoever to make a decision on. I think that's the thing is like we don't know what an everything app is, but the idea and the basic concepts behind it to me are you're trying to create a space where anybody and everybody can come together and transact with each other, whether it be through finance or just information or energy, really anything that you can transact with, you could use the app to do that. And so right now we have it all kind of distributed in different, like we have our banks to be able to send money and save our money and then be able to send it from one another. But then we also have the side of social media where that's where we send our information to each other. And then we have our energy with like Evergy, where we send our energy to an energy company to that then facilitates us being able to purchase energy so that we can power our homes. And so there's all these different separate sectors that for me, when I try to look at the bigger picture and the long run, I try to see where things are headed in terms of bringing together everything under one sort of identification where you only have to present one ID that is able to then give you access to all of that. So you don't have to have a separate account for this, a separate account for this, and a separate account for that. And so that's where I'm curious about where the concept of Web 3.0 comes into play. And if you've ever heard of like Web 3.0, it is basically there's a lot of different definitions, but I think the most well-known definition of it is that it's just the third generation of the World Wide Web. And it's characterized by its focus on decentralization, openness, and an enhanced user experience through advanced technologies like blockchain and artificial intelligence. And so that's kind of like a small summary over a lot of different things that I could break into and break down, but that's a basic synopsis of what I'm curious about and where social media might be headed and the transformations that it could have is using Web 3.0 and some sort of everything app, whether that be an X or separate application that we use to transact information, energy, and other types of ways of having a contract, I think, or with somebody, because that's all these interactions are, is they're just contracts back and forth with each other, either agreeing or disagreeing. And I think that there's a lot of different layers when you unpack how Web 3.0 could be implemented on any sort of platform, or really just where it is centralized or not centralized. When it comes to Web 2.0 right now, we view it as centralized because it is currently controlled by Amazon, Apple, Google, Microsoft, and prominently large tech companies. What Web 3.0 is viewing it as is a way to distribute where those centralized servers are with all that information, instead is across multiple locations and enhances security and gives users greater control over their data. At least that's kind of the theory behind it that is trying to be put into play with all these different ideas of crypto. And so that's what all these different crypto coins are, which are in themselves there's a lot of pump and dump schemes and a lot of issues with the industry. And crypto itself is trying to figure out how they can use this underlying technology to help benefit and connect more people. But when it comes down to it, the underlying technology, blockchain technology, is what is able to actually create the rails for these transactions and for this information to be shared with one another, that doesn't require an intermediary or someone who is in charge of it. And so I'm fascinated by that relationship and how that changes as we become more open to different types of applications that we adopt on social media and I mean in all of the above. I mean, there's a lot of different opportunities for it to be implemented with different types of platforms and social media applications people use. But I think that's one area of study that is very under researched and could be further inquiry to understand how it's changing the web. And people are actually working on this in a lot of different areas.
Yeah, you mentioned contract, and when I heard you say that, I teach sociology and psychology, and in sociology we talk about social contracts, and some are informal, some are formal. So I think about Web 3.0, and I think about the concept of a contract. So when you think about that, and you say contract, uh, when I think about contracts, I think about regulations, rules, procedures, policy. So when you think about a contract with the Web 3.0, are you also thinking about rules, regulations, policies, procedures? And if you are, who establishes those? Who maintains those? Would those be sort of, I guess, formal social contracts, or would those be informal? Where, would you just kind of expect people to know how to behave and how to act on the
Right.
web? So help me understand. I guess maybe if you were to pick a side, are you more on the side of more regulation, more policy, more laws, more procedure, or are you on a side of kind of a laissez-faire, free-for-all? We'll just see where this goes.
Right. That's a great question. I myself am more on the side of creating rails and restrictions and understanding how we utilize this to securely connect people instead of anything goes, everybody, this is a free market, you let whatever go. Instead, I think that we are figuring out as a country right now with our government how we can create regulations around this industry. And specifically, it's cryptocurrency right now. But cryptocurrency is just one small facet of what this whole industry could grow into in terms of transacting with one another safely and securely. But right now, it's just the process of going through, okay, what is a security? How do we define what a security is? And there's all sorts of arguments currently being made through the SEC and the different there's a lot of different lawsuits and things that are playing out in the courts right now that are going to help us define and figure out what an actual security is and how the government wants to define that. When it comes to the government's involvement with this, I think that the majority of people in the cryptocurrency industry have a mindset of we can never have a central bank digital currency or anything that is a centralized form of digital currency that the government controls, because then the government controls us and sees all of our transactions, and it's not free for us to be able to use it in whatever way and break out of the chains of the government. I think that's kind of I don't know, an anarchist approach in some ways, because I like to think that there is more sanity to how or there's not as much sanity when you approach it like that. There's more sanity when you approach it as, okay, blockchain technology is simply just a network of different computers that can connect to each other, and it can allow peer-to-peer transactions. Now you need to create contracts on that network that can actually self-execute and run efficiently enough to where all the predefined conditions are met. And if there's, any sort of issues or verbiage in the contract that need to be clarified, that those can be clarified before you actually get to the final processing of the contract. And so for me, it's interesting when you look up if there are sorts of things that are like that on the blockchain network. There's actually smart contracts that they've created, and smart contracts are self-executing digital agreements that run on blockchain networks, and they automatically execute the terms of a contract when predefined conditions are met without the need for intermediaries or third parties. And this automation is achieved through code that's written into blockchain specific programming languages. And so that can be like, Solidity, C++, Python. There's a lot of different languages that are out there for programmers to be able to clarify, we want these exact parameters to be met and this information to be shared with one another, but only once these conditions are actually fulfilled. And then it will allow whatever funds to be shared or sent to one another. And so I'm curious to see how that immutability and that opportunity to create something that is tamper proof, but also has trustlessness. So smart contracts eliminate the need for trust between parties, as the execution is guaranteed by the blockchain consensus mechanism. And that's the only issue here, is like people do not trust the underlying technology yet with what that blockchain is and the actual code that's executed. But people do trust to be able to download an application on your phone and send things on Venmo to one another without even thinking about it. So I'm curious to see at what point does that adoption move in that direction of people being okay with something and sending money and information like that, considering there are applications like X that Elon Musk is creating to have another form of way of transacting with currency and sending money to one another, or fiat, whatever it might be, that you would need to have some sort of platform there that is trusted, though. And so that's why it comes back to social media for me, and that trust and who actually is in control of creating that, because that's what the ultimate issue is there's not enough people that actually trust the underlying framework of blockchain technology to have Web 3.0 become a reality yet. So I'm curious to see how more applications being built on this type of technology will maybe usher in a new wave of adoption, especially with the way that Gen Z specifically consumes information and trusts their information with the current social media platforms without really thinking. I don't think the Gen Z really understands how their information is used by social media platforms. So I'm curious to see how if they trust it more or trust it less, and if they're willing to adopt new applications. That's kind of what my survey might reveal.
Right. So great discussion. It's obviously you've thought a lot about this, and
There's a lot,
just
yeah, it's kind of overwhelming. Yeah, hopefully I'm
yeah,
not throwing too much at you.
yeah, no, it's good. So, if you were to make a prediction today on the future of social media applications and the future of the World Wide Web 3.0, what would it be? And you don't have to really make a prediction, but maybe you can give an if-then statement or maybe a hypothesis.
Yeah, I think if adoption of applications continues in the trajectory that we're going down with finance and social media and a willingness to share our information, I think that we're going to inevitably end up in a Web 3.0 that revolutionizes how we share information with each other and control our privacy and have ownership of our data. Because really, what Web 3.0 promises to those who are all about the crypto Web 3.0 is that you finally can have control over your data and information. And then, if you would like to share it, then there is a terms and services and conditions contract that then you agree to that then allows you to be able to share that information and be paid for that. And so it's almost like a compensation. It's a weird, different change on how you would view social media applications because right now we are the product. We use social media applications, and then that information that we use on that platform is then shared with the person running the platform. And then they can sell that information to whoever they want, whatever types of advertisers, to then be able to advertise to us better. Some people like that. Some people like being advertised to and having things used off or based off of what they look up and use sold to them on social media. Some people like that format. Some people like myself are a little bit less trustworthy of large tech companies who take the information and then sell to advertisers and then get to bring in profits themselves off of that data. So I'm curious to see how that realization of how that information is used over time changes Gen Z's perception of the platforms. And if it does change their perception, then we will have an adoption of Web 3.0 applications and a new explosion of internet platforms, applications, all of the above, kind of like how we did with the internet bubble, in the early 2000s, and then it exploded, and then the ones that actually were practical and were usable were the ones that stuck around, and then made a profit, and were able to turn into the applications and the things that we use today. So I'm curious to see if we're going through another version of that with Web 3.0 and blockchain adoption of different applications, and I'm curious to see how Gen Z, the next generation that's kind of up in terms of how when they get employed and when they enter the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years, influences that adoption. So I think that that'll be the next stage is this adoption if Gen Z cares about their information.
That's right. Well, Dawson, thanks again for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. So, if listeners want to learn more, you can check out Dawson's drone content online at his social media handle, and that's at Dawson Wagner, DAWSON WAGNAIR. And you can find him on almost every social media platform, I think. You can also see Dawson's stories and hear Dawson stories on wildcat919.com. That's wildcat919.com. And because this podcast is about predicting the future, my questions to those listening are, how do you want the information that you share online to be used by tech companies in the future? And what social media platform do you trust the most? And how can social media platforms earn your trust in the future? And what freedoms do you want to have online with social media platforms that you use? So let me know. I'd love to know. Text or call me at 785-473-3721. That's 785-473-3721. Or send an email message to me at ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com. That's ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com, or post on any of my social media channels. I do ask you to go to the I Told You So podcast website at BenKohlITYS.com to connect and get your own I Told You So items at the merchandise link. You can get shirts and hats and hoodies and coffee mugs like the one right here. And I do hope that the I Told You So podcast is a space for healthy discourse and effective debate with the goal of predicting the future so you can proudly say, I told you so. If your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know that too. Thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast. And thanks again to my guest, Dawson Wagner. Followers of the podcast are very important, so please follow, like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Give a high rating and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.